Okay. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Siddhantotpala Sara Nityarasikam Hamsam Vilasatmakam Audaryaka Sudhama Sevakathanam Mishramba Bhakti Pradam Yachna Yukti Vichakshana Dvagaviro Vaishishta Saktya Sada Vandeham Tripurari Namakayatim Sri Bhakti Vedantinam Vande Sri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahorito Gauradaye Pushpavanto Chitro Sando Tamonudo Vandeham Sri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charana Sakha Sukhado Paramanando Sundaro Subala Priyo Aho Bhagyam Nanda Gopa Brajakasham Yan Mitram Paramanandam Purna Brahma Sanatanam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namustate Tapta Kantana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Brishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Shri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Vaishnav Sangha Ki Jai. All right, let's get started here. So first of all, I think I would like to start with the same way we started last week, and that was the collective recap of what we talked about last week. And actually, I think I want to give Sakyarati the mic, and let's hear what your mom said about the people, dying people's regrets.
Pranam to you and all devotees. And she gave me a very different answer from what I was expecting. And she said that generally people don't accept the way they're dying. So they are in denial of everything. So they are kind of against everything surrounding. But sometimes there are people who actually perform their dharma, and of course they have to die of something. So they really go in a very peaceful way. Like she can see they don't suffer so much and these things. Then she gave me 4 very different examples. Like one lady, she arrived there and my mom asked her, oh, maybe you can start thinking about what you want in your next life, you know. And she was super Christian. She didn't really follow her talks. But then after she starts saying, in the next life, I want to have high heels and a taller husband.
And you won't have that problem.
Yeah. And then she kept saying these things for 2 days. Wow. And then she died, like very short after. So in this case, my mom was saying that sometimes it's just so easy. There are things that you can kind of solve just by talking, but for some, you know, in this region where she lives in Italy, like until 40 years ago, women were very kind of oppressed.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe that was the reason or whatever. Then there was another lady who came with the cancer in the uterus. And she, from the first day, she kept saying she wanted to have more kids. She wanted to have kids. And my mom didn't even understand that she actually had one. But she would just keep saying, oh, in this life, I should have more kids and this and that. And the fact that also she had cancer in her uterus, it was also a sign that she never overcome that need. So my mom said that sometimes we can't follow our regrets, our desire, but we just have to accept what God gave us, because I'm sure she tried to have kids, you know.
Yeah.
And then there was another very extreme experience that I don't know if I should say it.
Extreme's good.
Like, okay. So I will give a small disclaimer at the beginning. Like she and all her colleagues, they always very often experience like ghost experiences.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, but very like very visibly. Like it's not just some thoughts or something. So one time there was a lady and she was always complaining that she was asking my mom, what you're doing in life, what this, what that. And my mom was telling her, I'm working here, doing that. And she's without a husband or partner. So she was super attracted by that, the old lady. She was like, oh, I wish I could have done that. But no, I had to work in the fields for my husband and and then one day she died. And when my mom was visiting another lady, this other lady was saying, why did you come with her? And my mom was like, yeah, whatever, she was alone, you know. And then she was keep saying, you can't come here with other people, like you're a nurse, you have to take care of me. And my mom just say, yeah, who is this person? And then she started describing her, and it was this other lady.
Wow.
Who died. And then she said that other weird things were happening, like the handle of the door just rolling, things like that.
Yeah.
For 3 days. And she said that she just understood that this lady really wanted to see what was to be an independent woman.
Oh, yeah.
Just looking what my mom was doing around her day.
Yeah.
And then after 3 days, it just disappeared.
Wow. That's so interesting. There's a really good documentary on Netflix called Surviving Death. I don't know if guys have seen it. It's all about these, it has like 4 or 5 episodes, and they're like, one is about reincarnation. They have all these amazing, like they go and interview people who remember their past lives, and it's been demonstrated that they remembered it right. There's one about like dying and coming back and the experiences. There's all these like amazing, and it's all like kind of indisputable because it's, it's the documentarian, him or herself, is like semi-skeptical, but like then he or she, I don't know who it is, but they just show like the actual data. So anyway, that's an interesting side point. Sarah is saying in the comments, can you repeat what people don't accept? The speech broke up. Pranam, Sarah.
Yeah, people don't accept the way they're dying, especially when they are young. Whatever they have, a cancer or whatever disease, they are in total denial, like they don't accept that they are going to die. And this shouldn't happen.
Yeah, a lot of times I've heard they're like really bitter and like resentful and stuff. And they like fight against the fact that, yeah. That's kind of a shame in a lot of ways. I hope none of us die that way, kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. That was awesome, Sakura. It's really, really good to have that kind of like actual, like somebody who's, your mom's there like every day seeing this stuff happen. And if anybody else has any other points that they remember from the class last week, or the points about how this death focus, or like not focus, but this like death meditation helps us do what we want to do as sadhakas, then I'd love to hear from anybody who has some points, especially points that meant something to you personally, or you found helpful in your own life.
Again, me.
Yeah, good. Somebody's saying something.
I would like to share something because I asked Shamananda also what he would change in his life. And he answered pretty much like you. He said, I'm very happy and I wouldn't change anything, And personally, I also wouldn't change anything. Maybe I would focus more on something without long-term goals.
Mm-hmm.
But my idea was like, yeah, but I have to think about how, like, shaman, about him, like who will cook for him, who will do this and this and that. But then thinking about what my mom said, then I just realized that it's just more healthy to think the way you and Shamananda thought, because then I still have the attachment, and it's material attachment. Maybe next time he won't be my husband, And so I really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought about it more. Like, if I was actually honest with my answer, I did realize that I keep myself too busy. I would change that for sure. I'd spend more time with Guru Maharaj and Brindaranya, because now it's just like bam, 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 And we're going to be talking about that actually. This class is all about that, like living a balanced life, that you actually also go forward with what you want to accomplish in life. But yeah, that was really good. Thanks a lot for that. Appreciate it. And if nobody else has anything to add, then I guess we'll just dive into the class, what I have here. Let me check my notes here. And since I like telling stories, I'd like to start the class number 3 with the fable, Aesop's fable about the farmer and the golden goose. So once upon a time, there was this farmer somewhere in central California, and he was really poor. Times were tough. Governor Newsom had turned off the water spigots for the breadbasket of the U.S. That like Central Valley area, and the guy was really struggling, and his kids went a little hungry, and his wife didn't have nice clothes and everything. And one morning, the farmer was doing his daily rounds. He'd go to the cows, he'd go to the pigs, and then he would go to the hen house. And then he went to the hen house, and all of a sudden there's like a golden egg under one hen. And he was like, oh, it's probably like rotten or something, because it's this weird color. And he's about to like chuck the whole egg. But then he was like, well, it's crazy, but let's just take it to the appraisers and see what it is actually. And then sure enough, it turned out to be pure gold. And the guy couldn't believe his luck. He was like, what happened? Like, this doesn't happen, but it seems to be real. So he cashed it and started buying stuff. He bought, shoes for his kids, clothes for his wife, got some nice gear for himself. And then next morning, he was like really anxious. He ran straight to the hen house, forgot about the other animals. What's happening there? And sure enough, there's another golden egg. And the guy was like, oh my God, this can't be happening to me. And so again, he cashed the egg and spent all the money. And same thing kept happening over and over again. And the guy, as his money grew, and he spent too much, but he knew, well, whatever, I'm going to get those eggs every morning, so I can overspend a little bit. And then one day, he thought he was a pretty thoughtful guy. So he was like, wait a second, like, I bet there's this like massive lump of gold inside of this goose. So why don't I just kill the goose and get the gold? So he did it, and ripped open the hen, and sure enough, there's nothing but blood and guts. And so he had just killed the only source of his income, and he owed money. So he ended up in massive debt, and no means of making a livelihood. And you might be wondering, like, what the heck does this have to do with what we're going to be talking about today? But the answer is that this whole story, actually, I have to say one thing before I go forward, is that in the Hindu or in our Gaudiya tradition, the exact same kind of like natural law has been told in the story of the half hen logic. And I'll quickly go through that if somebody hasn't heard it. It's basically this idea that the farmer realizes that he puts food in one end of the hen and then gets the eggs, or the kind of like the results from the other end. And he figures, well, if I just chop off the head, I'll just have one end that produces, and I don't have to put anything in. And then, of course, what happens is, he won't get anything from it, because he has this idea of like, chopping off like half of the process of producing results. And so really what these both stories like really hone in on or like explain is this natural law of effectiveness. And to define the word effectiveness, it basically, let's see what the dictionary says. It's the degree to which something is successful in producing a desired result. So if you say like some treatment is effective, it means that it's actually working on the disease. And so then since in this class, we're going to be talking about how to like effectively use those things that we learned in the first and the second class about, first of all, realizing that we are kind of in charge of our own free will and we can choose our, what we want to be. And then once we have that understanding and faith in ourselves as like being agents of our own lives, then we decide who we want to be based on, the right values and principles. And so then the effectiveness becomes essential when we start actually executing our lives in the way we actually want our lives to turn out. And this principle of effectiveness, the cool thing about it, and the thing that kind of proves that it is you could say a natural law, is that same like goose and the golden egg principle, you can apply to like almost everything in life. Like if you start from the very bottom, like take like a material asset. Let's say we have this mule here in Audaria. It's this little buggy, like a 4-wheel thing that we haul the dung up and down. The cows are up here where I am. And then we throw all the dung in the buggy and then we drive it all the way down the hill. There's this massive like field of cow dung that turns into compost in a couple of years. And so effectiveness is that I get the golden egg of being, I have to haul all the poop down in a wheelbarrow, which would be rough. But the goose, taking care of the goose, is that we actually maintain the mule. And I have to admit, the couple past years, 2 years, have been like super intense here. And I haven't always maintained the mule. And that's like kind of like the half hen logic. I'm just taking the results of this great tool, this mule that does so much work for us, that saves our trouble so much. I've been just taking the eggs and neglecting the actual goose, which is of course the mule. So that's one example of like, well, we did take it to full like maintenance yesterday. Chidahari took it into Ukiah, so goose has been taken care of. But it's so easy to just focus on the eggs. Like you basically try to cheat the system by being like, okay, I just want the results. I don't want to deal with the not fun part of like actually maintaining something or taking care of something. And this is like a really, really common tendency in humans in general, that we always try to cheat the system because we are like selfishly motivated and we just want the results for ourselves. And so that's like the bottom level of, okay, you got to maintain your assets, like physical assets of this effectiveness principle. But then you think about, let's take like, for example, sadhana. So the effectiveness principle in sadhana would be that you know your adhikar. You know what kind of eggs you're going to get out of the goose. And then that you work within the parameters of your adhikar so that you don't end up like burning yourself out or like just out of need for whatever it would be, like prestige, or I mean, sometimes it can be, a good motivation too. You just want to make more progress, but you try to chop off the end that you have to feed, which is your personal well-being and your whatever your adhikar is, like where you're at in bhakti. So you try to get the golden eggs by chanting 128 rounds a day, but you neglect the actual goose of your internal well-being and what your actual level is. And the extreme example, of course, is the Sahajias. I mean, talk about the half-hen logic. Basically, what they do is they say, "Oh, I don't. Why do all this like awful renunciation and all this boring stuff? Why don't we just, have sex with other people's wives and then call that, the highest, attainment?" And so you cut off the vairagya side and you just take the so-called bhakti side, which is really just enjoyment. But then you claim that that's the highest highest attainment. So that's like an intense form of ineffectiveness in bhakti, because you kill the goose, which means you kill your bhakti by just trying to get the eggs like that. And that certainly happens if you follow that kind of sahaja thing. I mean, like, what did Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya say? He said, Vairagya Vidya Nidya Bhakti Yogam. You can't separate the Vairagya and Vidya from Bhakti, although it's internal, it's in it. But you can't just prematurely say, oh, forget about the Vairagya and Vidya, we'll just go for the Bhakti Yoga, so-called Bhakti Yoga. So anyway, so my point is just that the golden egg, the goose and the golden eggs, it applies to everything, and it's extremely important. I've started using this idea in my life like all the time, and me and Vrindrani, my wife, we both do that. And so sometimes I'm just like burning the midnight oil, and she goes like, "Oh, you're an egg hunter, you're like going for the eggs again." And I like immediately she just says that, and I like realize what I'm doing. And so for me personally, it's been extremely useful to just always keep that a goose and the golden eggs story in mind, whatever I do, because it really, if you start thinking about it in your daily life, it pretty much applies to everything. And so it like trains you to not try to cheat the system. It trains you to recognize that there's a process to everything and that you can't skip ahead in the process. It's a step-by-step process. But that being said, that's not an excuse to say that you're balanced, but you're not trying to be progressive. There's a difference between stagnation and balance. So I think that's also an important thing to remember. But I think mostly people have, I would say, problems with, well, maybe not anymore. At least like from the 60s to the 90s, the international devotee scene was very much about trying to go beyond their adhikar and really try to grab the eggs without feeding the goose. So that was just kind of like a prelude to the class. It's very helpful if you guys keep that goose and the golden eggs in mind as I go through the rest of the class. But really what this class is about, you could just condense it in one phrase, and that would be that we are learning, learning to put first things first, which basically means that we learn to like prioritize and organize our lives around what's the most important thing for us, or the deepest values that we have. So we put the first things first and don't let all the chaos and all the like urgent things constantly like act upon us in our lives. And it's hard, like especially in the modern day, it's we like society is so fast paced and there's so much going on. It's very hard to like not get caught up in this thing where you just like constantly react to whatever comes your way. And it's easy, like I've fallen into this trap so many times that I think that, well, that's just the nature of our lives, like you can't change that. But that's just, there's definitely ways that we can change the course of like how we behave in terms of whether we react to things or whether we choose to act based on the core principles and values that we have. So I guess I should recap how this all connects between the first, second, and third class. So in the first class, it was all about that to like become clear about the fact that we have the power to choose, and like that we can become self-aware and become aware of all the scripts and paradigms that make us act in ways that are not useful for us, and then think about the paradigms that would be really conducive for what we actually want, which in our cases, we're sadhakas, is devotion that is like wholesome and integrated to the person that we are as, embodied beings in this world and the psychology that we have. So that's the first part. We have the power to choose. Then the second part is like, okay, you have the power to choose, but what are you going to choose? Who do you want to be? Like, what kind of a person do you want to be? What are the deepest values and principles that you really want to embody in your life? So then the second part is kind of like the theoretical putting together or designing, so-called, of who do you want to be. And then the third class what we're talking about today is that then you actually organize your life around those two previous things. You organize your life around who you really want to be. And I think to really get a good idea of how those things work together and how they are inseparable from each other, you absolutely need all those different aspects. Is like if we think about building a house, right? So first of all, you're an average guy, you don't have much money or anything, but then all of a sudden you find out that you have an inheritance you didn't know about. And then so there's like a couple $1 million all of a sudden. And all you've always wanted to have is this like super cool, nice house, right? So then, okay, no, you have the capital to actually actualize it, but then you start thinking like, well, like what kind of a house do I exactly want? So then you go through this whole mental process, like we talked about in the previous class. There's always like two creations to everything. There's the first mental creation and then the actual doing of it. So then once you know you have the money, you really start thinking about like, what kind of a person am I and how would that reflect in the house that I really want to build? And so you become completely clear on what you actually want in terms of the house, and then you make blueprints. That's an important part, that you actually write it down and you become completely clear on what you want. And it's very useful to actually write it down and have it as a physical, almost like a personal constitution or something, that because it's so easy to forget when the everyday like crisis and the chaos kicks in. So then you have the blueprints for the house, you have the money, and then the actual building starts. And then you're building it yourself, by the way. So then you have to organize yourself so that you don't get completely frustrated and like just throw away the plans because you thought, oh, it was just a silly idea. I should have known I can't do it because I'm not organized. So I'm just going to live in a little shack that I put together from like corrugated metal and some plywood. So obviously the point is that when we come to the point where we start doing the actual work of the everyday life, changing our everyday life to like very nicely embody and reflect what we truly want and who we want to be, it's going to go from the planning phase is kind of like this like right brain activity. If you know the concept, like the right brain is the creative, imaginative, kind of like big picture side, and then the left part of the brain functions based on analysis and breaking things down and the practicalities of things. So when we do the blueprints and really like try to visualize what we want, that's a right brain thing. And then once we start doing it, you have to kind of go to your left brain. So it's this like kind of like a integrated, wholesome approach to like using both hemispheres of your brain, so to speak, to really get the best out of the capacity that you have overall in your brain, right? So then, like for me personally, for example, I'm a total right brainer by nature, and it has been very, very hard to come to that left side and just like start like really analyzing my life practically and like breaking it down and understanding the sequence of things and how things work in the kind of nitty gritty, and how I can, if I harness that understanding, how I can actually like make my life so much more pleasant for both of the hemispheres, but not just one, and of course way beyond the hemispheres, because what we're doing here is nirgun bhakti, right? And so it's totally, absolutely essential. A lot of times, okay, one thing at a time. So it's totally essential to really understand and integrate the stuff we talked about in the first class and then the stuff we talked about in the second class, because without the inheritance and without the blueprints and the conceptualization, you can't have a beautiful functioning house. So a lot of people, they only focus on, again, the golden eggs, which is, I want to have a beautiful house. But what's the actual work that you have to put into your life to get the golden eggs in this case? And it's obviously all the stuff we talked about in class 1 and 2. But there's like such an intense, like, what's the English word? Temptation to jump over the natural process because you just want the results, right? And that's where we have to rein ourselves in with discipline, basically, like self-discipline, that we look at the situation for what it is, and we don't try to jump ahead, but we become sort of like disciples of the process, right? That we don't try to cheat ourselves or the system, because what ends up happening is then you cut off the head of the hen. That's how far your cheating of the system is going to go. You're actually going to shoot yourself, or I should say chop yourself in the foot. And so then at this point, when you start executing your lives around your life, when you try to like kind of structure and organize your life around your deepest principles and values and who you really want to be, then these things like integrity and discipline become really important. Integrity, of course, means that you're able to like make promises to yourself and others and actually stick to them. You have integrity in that way, that you don't just say things and not then do them. And so you keep your promises to yourself. And then if you fail in keeping your promises, then you quickly try to make amends and get back on the program as fast as you can. And so there's a really useful kind of visual graph in the 7 habits that talks about basically how to view all the time you have in your life in a way that then your time is easier to organize into this value-driven, principle-centered, basically whole, I guess you could say. And let me do the screen share here. So this is gonna look like total pig Latin at first. So let me just explain it to you before you scream and run away in horror. Okay, so do you guys see this like square thing with different things? Okay, good. So it's called the time management matrix, but I'd like to say that term is like so corporate and awful that let's just call it the self-management matrix. So it's basically split into 2 different categories. It's either urgency and importance, right? And then so these are called quadrants. These different squares, the 4 squares are like different quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so then if we start going through these quadrants, the first quadrant here is, like you can see from the left and top, it's urgent and important. So quadrant 1 would be all the stuff in your life that's urgent and important, like any kind of crisis, say like, or not necessarily crisis, but say like you have to pick your kids from school and you know that it's urgent. Like you can't just let them wait for 3 hours, like I know some parents have done, friends of mine. And so like it's urgent and it's obviously important for you because it's your kids. Or say like you got to pick your guru from the airport. You can't be just like, well, I'll do it a little later. I think he'll be fine. He can chant a couple hundred rounds while he's waiting. And then there's also like deadline-driven projects, anything that you know is important for your values and like principles, but that you know you have to do. There's a deadline for it. It's urgent. It's pressing on you. And then the second quadrant is this very like important stuff, but not urgent. So like, for example, what we are doing right now, at least what you guys are doing right now is important, I hope important, but not urgent. Like you're coming on Zoom and you're really trying to learn things so that you can live a better life and you can practice bhakti better, which, you know, all of us hold as the highest goal in life. And so that's one example of the important but not urgent things. And other things would be like prevention, like you think ahead, that like, so you avoid being in the quadrant 1 square of like crisis after crisis, or you exercise and have a good diet because you know it's going to be good for you in the long run, and you like prevent conditions that are going to decrease your life span and the quality of your life. And like chanting is a perfect example of the quadrant 2 important but not urgent activity. Like a lot of times, unfortunately, when we get busy and we don't have enough time, the first thing that may fall off is chanting. And that's very unfortunate, but that's just how it is, because the urgent things press you on us so much that we kind of have to make these quick decisions. And then the third here in the left bottom corner, the third quadrant is the not important but urgent stuff. And so interruptions, that's a good example. Like you're doing something important, but somebody calls you, you know, I get these calls all the time from India, like, hello, we're from Apple support. Your computer has been hacked. And then they try to get my password, you know. So that would be very unimportant, but urgent, because you have to pick up the phone when somebody calls. And another example is like anything that like are not fully in line with your like deep core values and principles, but somebody like a friend calls and really wants you to do something that you're not interested in, but you feel like because you want to please them and you don't want to get into an argument or something, you want to be a nice person, you agree to it, but it's not important, although it's pressing. And then the last quadrant here is quadrant 4, which is, let's just say that social media mostly is like the perfect example of quadrant 4 activity. Like it doesn't contribute anything to your actual like mission in life or your like highest values, but it's really pleasant to do, and it's so easy to do because it's just like immediate gratification. This is really kind of like the pleasure-seeking quadrant here at the bottom. And when I was looking at this, I all of a sudden realized yesterday that this actually falls pretty neatly into the idea of the 3 gunas in the Hindu system. And you could say that the quadrant for 1 is obviously, that's like rajas. You get things done. You like react to things that happen. You immediately get it done. That's like clearly like a rajasic approach to life. Of course, we always have, we can't like do away with this quadrant in life, but we can diminish it. But I'll talk about that later. So like the first quadrant is rajas. Then the second quadrant obviously is sattva and beyond when it's chanting. But just as a principle, you could say it's sattva. It's like you think ahead and you have this wholesome understanding of who you want to be and the activities that are not urgent, but you know are like greatly going to support your life as a wholesome sadhaka and like a satisfied person overall. And then the not important urgent quadrant here, the quadrant 3 is like a mixture of the urgency, which is the rajas, but also since it's not important, but yet you just do it because it's pleasant and easy. So it's a mixture of rajas and tamas. And then the activities that don't contribute anything to your actual well-being and your values, that's pure tamas. And this is another one of these like kind of like visual cues or ways of structuring your understanding of your life that has greatly helped me. Like I'm doing some activity, I'm like what quadrant is this in? It seems kind of weird, maybe, I don't know. But like just having these like practical ways of kind of like categorizing based on your values and what you want to accomplish, these tools of like categorizing your behavior and checking in with yourself if you're on the right track. This one diagram for me has been like extremely useful in that way, in like keeping my life organized in the way that I feel like totally supports what I want to achieve in this life. And I just to make the principle clear, I want to give you an example of a situation that has all those different quadrants. And the example of it is me helping Guru Maharaj getting on Namras's podcast. It's a hypothetical situation that will come actually to fruition on the 3rd of October next month. But anyway, here's this like hypothetical idea. So we've agreed to having Guru Maharaj on Namras's podcast on the 3rd. And then so the day starts approaching, but I'm so busy with everything that I just run from one thing to another. And then when the morning of the 3rd comes, I realized that I'm running late and I start panicking. I start putting the video camera together and all the lights and Guru Maharaj's computer to make sure it's all connected. And I'm freaking out. My hands are shaking. I'm trying to figure out like, oh, what's the password? Where am I going to go with this thing? And sure enough, I can't get the mic to work. The mic is there's no sound. And I'm completely stressed out. There's 5 minutes until, prime time, can't get it to work. And then the time comes to go go live. I somehow fix it. I don't know even what I did. I just tried everything in my panic, and somehow it worked. And then it's prime time. And 5 minutes into the show, the sound cuts off. And I start panicking again. Like I start like trying everything out. Don't know what's going on here. And then my phone rings. And there's my god brother calling, I think I have an idea what it might be, because he's watching it at his home, streaming it. And he's like, yeah, I think I have a good feeling about this. My horoscope for this month was saying that I'm going to break a big case, and I think this is it. And I'm like, oh God, well, what was that? Oh, it was from the People magazine. Okay, great. So he gives some, take the batteries out. And I'm like, dude, there are no batteries in this camera. And okay, then the guy's like, I just hang up and I start rushing again. And then I realized, oh, I hadn't plugged in the boom mic. So that was it. Bam, we're back online. Okay, we have sound. But the whole thing has made me so stressed out that instead of like paying attention and overseeing the whole thing, I just collapse in my chair and I pull out my phone and I start doing the movement that everybody knows what it means. You start scrolling just to get your mind off of the insane stress and anxiety that you're feeling. And so I get some relief from it. And I'm able to kind of like escape the situation. But because I'm not paying attention, the camera starts blinking. And then all of a sudden, the whole thing, the screen goes out. And I forgot to plug in the camera because I wasn't paying attention, because I was too distracted by everything else. And then so that kicks me back in the beginning of like going around in a panic, trying to figure out how to fix it. And this is pretty obvious what's going on here. So of course, the fact that I'm helping Guru Maharaj being on the podcast itself is quadrant 2. It's not urgent in itself, but it's extremely important for me. And then the panic of like trying to get the whole thing working is extremely important and extremely urgent. So that's quadrant 1. And then my god brother calling, that would be quadrant 3. It's urgent. The phone's ringing, I pick it up, but it's completely unimportant because he doesn't have anything useful to say. And then the scrolling would be the quadrant 4, where I just like sink into this like mode of ignorance because I have to get an escape from the situation. And then what happens is it perpetuates itself because I fall into the quadrant 4. It kicks me back in the quadrant 1 of important and urgent because I wasn't paying attention that something else was going badly in the streaming. And I just wanted to make a disclaimer. When this actually happened on the previous Namras podcast, it did not have anything to do with me. I'm washing my hands. It was something completely unexpected that I could have not, in either quadrant, I could have not figured out beforehand. So anyway, I've been acquitted. And then the question I want to ask you guys is, what would have happened if, in the above example, if I would have really focused, if I had like this quadrant 2 lifestyle? Let's hear from somebody. Let's see. I'm going to just like randomly pick somebody from here. Gordon Ryan. How would have the situation been different if I would have focused on the quadrant 2 lifestyle?
Well, probably would have.
For some reason I can't hear you. Let's see here. Let me try it.
How about now?
Okay, now I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you probably would have caught the battery flashing or the light flashing on the camera.
Yeah, but why would I have caught it if I was in quadrant 2, in the like that mindset of doing the important things but not the urgent?
Well, you just probably would have been looking around at everything, checking over to see what needed to be done,
and
just making sure that everything was working the way it should.
Right. So I guess the really crucial thing is that I would have managed my time in a way that I would have not had to rush in the first place. Like that I would have like made enough time for myself to actually have enough time to check that everything's okay with the setup. But when you like live for one crisis to another, which I've done for years before, then you don't really have time to prepare for anything. You just react to whatever happens. You jump from one thing to another. And that's what happens. You make a lot of mistakes. Let's see here. But the thing is, of course, like when we live from one crisis to the other, it's kind of hard to find time to really focus on the preventative stuff and the long-term planning, which is like a crucial part of living in that quadrant two. And the thing is, like, you kind of have to pull from the not important section of the four quadrants of your time. So then there's like a lot of us, many of us, unfortunately, spend a lot of time in quadrant four, these like useless activities, because we're so stressed out from our lifestyle of like always just putting out fires and living from crisis to crisis that we need some kind of relief. So then it's hard to pull from quadrant four, but that's really what we kind of have to do in the beginning, because we haven't organized our lives in a way, and we don't have time to organize our lives in a way that that would kind of build up on itself in terms of having more foresight and being able to kind of what's the word? I guess foresee the possible problems that might be coming in the future. And so that's one way of finding time. Another way of finding time that's very tricky is to prioritize within the important things. And I'll give you an example of what happened to me. 2 weeks ago, Sripad Padma Maharaj contacted me about this project that he's doing. He's basically having different people from our Sangha and his other, I'm sure other devotee friends as well, go through all the books of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because there's this, I'm sure you're aware of it, this ongoing debate about the inherency of bhakti and whether bhakti is inherent in the jiva or not. And so he wants to, and there's this one devotee called Sundar Gopal from the Narayana Maharaj's group who brought out some interesting information about Bhaktivinoda's views on this topic. So anyway, to make a long story short, Padmanabh Maharaj asked different people to go through different books of Bhaktivinoda and look for all the references to this subject in the books. And so he asked me to do that as well. And I knew when he asked that I had way too much to do already. And I knew that I shouldn't agree to it, but I'm a bit of a people pleaser, as you might know. And I really considered what I should do. And somehow, because I felt it is an important thing. I mean, it's massively important in a lot of ways. I figured, well, I'll just do it. I'll just like ram it in my schedule somehow. And so then 2 weeks later, a few days ago, Padmanabh Maharaj writes me and he's like, do you have the notes? I'm like, well, I don't have the notes. And so he gave me an extra week. But really what I did there were two important things. But the most important thing for me is my seva to my Guru Maharaj, because I live with him. I'm very close with him like that. So like that is my hub of being a sadhaka. But Padmanabh Maharaj's thing was also very important. But there's two levels of importance for me personally. I'm not saying overall, but for me personally, I should have kept my focus on my service to Guru Maharaj and like nicely told Padmanabh Maharaj, and unfortunately, I can't do it this time. But it gets extremely tricky when it's two important things. So that's what my point here is that it's much easier to try to pull from your quadrants 3 and 4, which are the non-important things. One is urgent but not important, and one is unurgent and unimportant. So for example, the urgent but not important, we really have a lot of people, because we're focused in terms of like social dealings and our status in these social circles, we have a really hard time saying no to people because we're not fully driven by the deeply internalized values and principles. I suffer still from this problem a lot. I've gotten a lot better, but like it's so easy to just, because it's the immediate thing that somebody's asking you something, but then your deepest values are not or urgent, but they're important. So it's so easy to just push that unurgent thing aside, although it's much more important than the urgent but not important. This is getting a little complicated, but I hope you follow. So anyway, like, it's so easy to just say yes, yes, yes to everything that is actually not very important to you because it's pressing, and there's this whole social thing, and you want to be liked, and you want to basically portray a certain image of yourself to the social circle and to your social world. But really, we have to start saying no to people asking for things if it's not important to us. I mean, not everything, but like, as long as, if it like starts contradicting our deeper values and what we want to accomplish on that level, then we have to learn to say no. And we really have to learn to say no to the quadrant 4 stuff of like useless time wasters like social media, if it doesn't in any way support your values and what you want to accomplish in life. We got to start like really weeding out that kind of behavior with that discipline. But it's extremely important that we feel that the values that we have are like fully ingrained and like fully integrated to like who we actually are. Because if we don't have that, then we will not have the discipline to actually go through with sticking to our promises to ourselves, basically. And in that connection, I want to do a little quick poll here. Let's see, another screen share. Oops. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Okay, so if you feel comfortable, please respond in the chat section with the number. So the question is, for the ones that don't see this screen, the question is, if you were to fault yourself in one of these areas, which would it be? 1, the inability to prioritize. 2, the inability to organize around your priorities. And 3, the lack of discipline to execute around your priorities and organization. So let's see what you guys think about that. Just put a number in this chat and let me get this. Oh, I can't see the chat as long as I'm doing the screen sharing, so I will have to wait for a little bit. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, we will probably not get a comprehensive cut of what people in general think. So far, we have only 3 answers, 3 replies. I'll wait for a couple seconds more. Okay, we have 4 votes so far. Maybe that's good enough. It might not be more than that. Okay, so let's see what we have here. People say 2 and 3, 3, 3 and 3. And this is really common. Most people think like that. And I would have answered the same way. But then when you really familiarize yourself with the whole process of like what we've talked about, the class 1, 2, and 3, a lot of the times what it turns out to be is actually that we haven't gotten completely clear on our deepest values. Because say like if you go back to the exercise of being on your deathbed and regretting that things you didn't do, or no, not deathbed, but you have 1 year to live, you're not going to need any discipline to do what you want to do because you so much identify with your core values. I don't know if you know what I'm saying, but to me, this makes a lot of sense. Like, if we are really interested in something, which means that it's our core value, that we really, really identify with that value, we don't need discipline. Like there are kids, like say like my nephew, he's 8 or 9 years old. and he's an amazing chess player. And it's like he didn't need discipline to learn it, because kids don't really have discipline. He just really loved playing chess, you know. And so really, when this question of like, what is wrong with us because we can't, you know, get our lives together, to put it coarsely, really, I think it's so important to focus on this, the thing we talked about in the second class, like, how do we integrate? And for us as sadhakas, it's especially tricky, because we know intellectually that we want to be basically pure devotees. We want to be devotees first and foremost, but we don't actually feel that in our hearts. And that shows in the way that we actually live our lives and like what we focus on in our lives. So to really live a principle-centered life, we somehow have to figure out, how can we integrate the devotee personality to our embodied, that person that we are in this world. And I guess you could say that sadhana bhakti, that's what it's all about. Like, we basically imitate devotees, fake it till you make it. Like Guru Maharaj said this to me when I was a young brahmachari. I went up to him and I was complaining about my mind or something. And I think he just said, like, yeah, sometimes you just gotta fake it till you make it. And for me, it wouldn't work for everybody. Don't take that as this like Prabhupada said kind of thing. But in that situation, for me, that was great advice, because I actually did it and it worked on so many levels. Not that I'm like, completely integrated or anything. I'm not saying that at all. But like an example of like deity worship, I did not used to like deity worship when I joined. I had this gyan tendency. Deity worship seemed weird, to be honest with you. And I didn't understand it. But just by being in Audarya for years, now I do the puja like every day and I love it. It's like one of my very favorite services. And that just came from faking it until I actually made it in that way. But then, of course, we, at the same time, I don't want to say that like the way to integrate this devotee side and the embodied side of us is to just like fake it as long as it takes to get, I mean, in some ways that is the process, but we can't like just like act like we're pure devotees. Because first of all, it's really a pain to be around people like that. And second of all, it doesn't really work. So, the point I wanted to just make with this whole thing that I've been talking about for the past 5 or 10 minutes is that really we got to put in the work to understand what we actually want. And then if those wants are not in line with devotion and we really want to be really serious and good sadhakas, then how do we bridge that gap? And that could be like so many classes in itself, so I can't go too deeply into it. But I find every class now that there's so much to say that I don't get everything out that I wanted to say. I want to talk about this whole thing about how to actually live that Quadrant 2 lifestyle, but I simply don't have time for it anymore. And I don't want to like take too much of your time, because this is kind of a lot to take in, I think. So I think I'm just gonna end here with that thought of working on understanding our paradigms and understanding what we want. And then once you figured that out, then you can go to the 7 habits and read that section about how to actually put it to work in our everyday lives. There's a lot of good stuff and like practical tips about how to actually make it work in your everyday life. But yeah, I'm going to stop here for today, and I thank you for your attention. And if you guys have any questions or comments, as usual, please, let's hear them. Okay, somebody's got his hand or her hand up. How can I know who it is? Oh, Sarada Sen.
Haribol.
Haribol.
Haribol. Okay.
Nice to see you.
Yes. Nice to see you. I hope you can see me. What was the last thing we were talking about? I had something I wanted to say.
Was it about integrating the devotional?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just managed to somehow do that this summer.
Wow.
I've been in an empty house. My father passed away, and I've been living in an empty house in England. My husband's back in Canada, right, where I live. And so I've just basically been working so many things out and integrating lifestyle, and that's been part of I had a health and lifestyle consulting business after my PhD in stress research.
Whoa. Man,
and so
you should be giving the class.
well, I'm just so into this. I'm really into this whole subject. That's just, why I'm talking now, because I started to really enjoy this whole thing that we're talking about, integration of those two things.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that once, I think once I went with anything that really inspired me, or something that really I enjoyed within my sadhana practice.
Yeah.
That really got me going and fired up.
Yeah.
You see, because that gets your right brain going. And then if your right brain is going with the emotions of the, feeling good about this,
right.
For me, it was singing bhajans at night, right? And so I've got a lovely melody, so I'm thinking of the Lord and Radha and everything. And it gets me going. So then I have a good night's sleep. And then in the morning, I have these lovely, creative thoughts, whatever. But things just started to happen in my lifestyle because of that. Sometimes, as if really inspired one day, especially by a class with something within your life, your faith, whatever you're doing, your practice, and then you start to get stimulated, And I think that really does, every now and again, that really helps, I think, to do what, and all these things fall into place sometimes.
Yeah.
And your relationships are better. It may just happen for a little while, then fall away until you start to get stimulated by something else again. But because I kept this up all summer, May, June, July, every night with these bhajans, it was just amazing. I just felt so good. My relationships, even with non-devotees, it started to, because I was separating devotees and non-devotees, especially around here. There's no temples, nothing. It's like a wasteland. I always thought it was a spiritual wasteland here. So I was wondering, what am I going to do this whole summer? Trying to detach myself from this house because it has to be sold. I had to ship everything back out to Canada. I have to detach myself. There's forest fires in Canada. I may lose my house there. So I was facing losing both my homes this summer. But still, despite all of that, I went with what inspired me. I went with what got me going. The beauty of, these bhajans. And so, that's kept me afloat. But I don't know. Now, do I have to keep doing that every night for the rest of my life, or is there going to be something else that comes along that's going to inspire me? Right. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. It's really something positive, and then it's not, as you say, a reactionary lifestyle anymore, because that's a negative lifestyle. It's not positive. Right. And so that helps with that. I did a stress management diploma. After doing the science of stress, I had to do biochemistry of stress because I was a biochemist, medical biochemist. So I was looking at stress and disease. But once I started to do these things that, this more psychology and everything else, then I started to link it with my sadhana practice. Everything I learned as just as an academic subject, I started to put it into and it became more exciting when I put it into my Krishna conscious lifestyle and devotee friends. And it just, putting those gray, mundane topics, just putting them into Krishna consciousness and putting them into my practice, it just brought color to them, and it was just lovely. I'm just saying, I had an amazing experience, which is completely unexpected. On the death of my dad, I thought I'd come into this house, spend 5 months just in grief, just, not being able to practice. Right. But it suddenly became the other way, just because I went with what inspired me and I was singing these bhajans, and that was it. I'm just letting you know that that's an experience I've had. I don't know if it helps, but
Oh,
anyway.
that's beautiful. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so nice to hear like success stories, because a lot of times we're like,
Well,
struggling so much, right?
up till now, 5 months anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And what you said about how you kind of brought your academic side together with your devotional side, that I really resonate with that. And I think that's exactly what I was kind of like poking at earlier, is that we have to somehow do that as long as it doesn't compromise our devotional life, because that's when we get excited about things, because it makes sense to us like on every level. And that what I'm doing with this whole like reading about habit formation and this like the 7 habits stresses this like principle centered life, that you kind of organize everything around that. Those things have like so much helped me be a better sadhaka and be a more like a steadier sadhaka. And that it's very sad to me that people dismiss things like that just based on the fact that they're so-called mundane. Like if you think about like the Goswamis, like Rupa Goswami used this like so-called mundane Ras theory to like explain all of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, basically, because he had the right center. Like it was all about Ras, and he used this other thing that wasn't, you could say, not his original thing, to explain this amazing philosophy. And there's this book called, it's by these 2 Stanford professors, called Designing Your Life. I don't know, have you heard about that book?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, the reason I'm mentioning that book is because they are talking about what you just said, that when you follow your inspiration, or basically like when you follow, they talk about the flow state, like you trying to track your days and you figure out what puts you in the flow state. And then you try to replicate that as much as you can without killing the goose, basically. Like you replicate that flow as much as you can when it's like integrated to the rest of your life. And that's, in my opinion, like such a brilliant idea of like staying like inspired and also figuring out who you actually are, because the flow state doesn't lie. You can't force a flow state. For those who don't know what a flow state is, it's that state when you're like completely kind of aligned with your environment and with your like your internal sense and your external world is aligned. Like say, like if you're really fanatical, snowboarder, you get into the flow when you're going down the slope or something like that. So then like in terms of devotion, that's exactly what I guess you did. You found your flow in the bhajans, and then you just followed that, and it made everything in your life better, not just your devotional life.
Everything is
incredible.
so unexpected, and it's so simple in a sense.
Right.
But
right.
in a sense, it's still amazing,
Yeah, really. Thanks so much for that. That's
okay. That's all
really
right.
cool.
Very
And the next, I want to say one thing. The last class is going to be about habit formation and stuff. So since you have like so much knowledge about all this stuff, I'm going to tap you a little bit on this one. So be ready to be the expert commentator on that one.
Okay, try. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that. That was
Hare Krishna.
Jai.
Jai.
Anybody else? I know it's hard to come on after that comment, but if somebody has any comments, please, let's hear them. Well, I guess we've covered, it's already 9:40 here, so I think we've covered enough ground. Let me stop the recording because I have an announcement, but